Okay folks, I fought really hard with myself whether or not I should do this video. I even asked my followers on Facebook and they in fact encouraged me to go ahead and do it. So here it goes, let's see where it's going to take us. I am about to talk about a part of Germany's darkest history, and I will also reveal a part of my very personal family story today. But before we start, I would like to say that I am not a Nazi. I think those maniacs tried to set the world on fire and almost succeeded. I completely abhor what they've done, so horrible that it makes me sick to just start to think about what they have done. In this video I will fully focus on historical facts. I will not glorify the Nazis and none of their organizations. And I will even cover their symbols, even though I legally don't have to do it since this is just a documentary piece and not Nazi propaganda. My own political views are fairly mainstream, although none of the currently significant parties represent my opinion. Maybe one of these days I should start the Slingshot Channel party. What do you think? Would you join? Okay, now that we have this behind us, let our little story unfold. Todd from Todd's workshop gave me this beautiful handmade dagger when we met in Brighton in early spring this year. So it's handmade, it's actually a so-called Baselard dagger. This was very common in medieval times. You can actually still buy this one, it's a beautiful piece. The link to his website is down there. And when I presented this on my Facebook page and other social media, people immediately said, you know what, that looks like one of these Nazi daggers. And in fact it is true, because this is actually a version of the Swiss dagger, or Baselard. Baselard named after the city of Basel, which is actually not so far from here, a Swiss city on the German border. And these were so common that people still like the shape, and I think it's very pleasing. But the Nazis also used it like as an inspiration for their infamous daggers. We will look at the features of this beautiful dagger later on. So the infamous Nazi daggers that were designed a little bit after the original that this was also based on, from the 14th century. They came in actually three versions. One for the SA or Sturmabteilung, one for the SS or Schutzstaffel, and one for the NSKK, which is like their mobile squad. Since I have a fairly sizable knife collection, I happen to own one of the original SS daggers and also a lot of the more modern kind of cousins. So here it is, an original SS dagger, of course with the Nazi insignia covered by a little bit of tape. It is rare. Only about 220,000 pieces were made, and many of course are lost. But this one is specifically interesting because of its backside. Since the backside actually, even though you wouldn't really see anything from that distance, it actually shows that the owner of this dagger was a veritable Nazi. He was not just a guy who joined later on, but he was originally a Nazi even before they assumed power. Actually, those daggers ran through three different generations. This one actually is one of the first generation daggers, made 1934 or 1935. And on the back side, it had an engraving that has been filed out. And that said, in herzlicher Kameradschaft Ernst Röhm, which means in cordial comradeship. Now, Ernst Röhm was actually the leader of the Sturmabteilung, actually a group of thugs and ex-soldiers, if you want, the armed branch of the early Nazi organization. They actually terrorized Germany before the Nazis came to power and also afterwards. Very notorious organization. And Ernst Röhm was of course an important figure, but at some point Hitler started to be suspicious that he might actually want to overturn government and therefore he was eventually killed. Ernst Röhm actually had 9,900 of these daggers made, and those actually were only available to people that had joined the organization before 1932, so latest the 31st of December 1931. The Nazis came to power in 1933, so that's a good 2 years earlier. And you can really say that someone who owned that dagger with that kind of inscription was a veritable Nazi. And of course, SS member. We don't know who that person was, but we know that he was on board early on. So this dagger is 87 years old. It's almost 90 years old. And I think for that it is still in good condition. So when Ernst Röhm was killed, that was only 4 months after he approved the manufacturing of these daggers. So people think that not even all of these 9,900 were ever issued. And in fact, people had to buy them from their own money. It cost around 12 Reichsmark, which would be about 45 euros in today's money, like $60. Anyway, only about 4 days after they killed Ernst Röhm, they issued an order that all of these comradeship things, engravings on the backsides of the daggers, had to be filed out, like grinded out. And this happened to this dagger, but you can still see it. Not sure if the camera will capture it. You can still see that there are like remainings from it. Almost all of the Nazi officers followed the order. And I wish that this owner wouldn't have done that, because otherwise this would now easily be 5 figures. There's so few of them that survived with the intact engraving. But now let's look at its features. It is in good unrestored condition, and before people start to say it's a fake, I actually have all the paperwork that prove that it's not. Specifically had it done just for today's video. I knew that it was original before, but the paperwork confirms it. Its value will be somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 euros. The expertise actually says it's worth 3,300. So if you look at it, of course there's the swastika in the Nazi eagle. I covered it with tape. And also there's the SS insignia up here. It's also covered in tape. And then we have the engraving that says "Meine Piep heißt Piep." Why am I beeping this out so amateurishly? Because it is actually an illegal sentence in Germany. We're not allowed to use it. Maybe for historical purposes, but in general, you're not supposed to use that sentence because it's a Nazi line. Now, the Nazis meant what is written on this dagger, because the translation means, "My honor is loyalty." And that has to be taken word by word. A member of the SS was not supposed to define his honor by things like chivalry, or kindness, or ethics. No, no. He had only one piece of honor, and that is following Hitler's orders and following the orders of his superior officers, which represented Hitler. So this is how you have to understand the saying here, the sentence. It means, my honor is loyalty. I don't care what your honor is, but mine is loyalty, and this means I'm going to do what I'm told, and I will not hesitate. Yeah, Germans and their honor. Do you know that in Germany actually you can defend your honor against others even with physical force? Yes, it is the law. So if you are attacked, not only if someone tries to steal things from you or hurt you, but even if he just attacks your honor, for example by standing in front of you and calling you names, you have the right to defend yourself, if necessary, with physical force. So someone doesn't stop to call you names, you can slap him, and if he still goes on, you can actually escalate. To what point? That will be decided by a judge, but the law clearly says the honor is just as defendable as your physical health and also as your property. Okay, let's continue with the dagger. On the back side we can see who made it, and this was actually made by Gottlieb Hammesfahr in Solingen. Let me see if you can see this. Now that was of course only one of the many companies that made it, because 220,000 of these daggers, plus like 3 million SA daggers and so on, and a few thousand of the NSKK ones, actually that was too much for just one knife manufacturer. So there's a whole lot, probably 40 or 50 different makers, and in the first generation, the early generation, that was all that was stamped on it. Later generations also had other stuff stamped on it, but this one is first generation, as I said. And keep in mind, those were only made for about 6 years, because in 1940 production was stopped because simply Germany needed guns more than bladed weapons, and therefore all the metal manufacturers switched accordingly. Let's now look at the dagger as a functional weapon. Well, it is pointy, it is pointy, so I guess you can kill someone with it. And that was actually something that an SS man who owned it was supposed to do. The bearer of this dagger was actually obliged, legally forced, to use this dagger and kill anyone who would dare attacking the honor of the SS corps. So it is pointy, but it is not sharp. Actually, you can actually probably cut butter with it, but nothing else. So it's really not a sharp dagger, and none of them was sharp. And actually, if you sharpen it, you would immediately destroy its value. So it was not supposed to be sharp. And the handle is actually funny because look how small it is. I mean, if I try to hold it, I cannot. See, I mean, I'm not a huge guy. I'm just about 5'9" or 5'10", 180 centimeters, whatever that is. My hands are, fairly big, but certainly not the biggest hands in the world. But I cannot possibly hold this knife in any comfortable way. I'm actually hurting myself because the edgy parts here are cutting into my flesh. This actually is so small that it looks like it's made for children. So were the Nazis all so small, or why is the handle so short? No, the explanation is that this was not really a combat weapon. It is a ceremonial, a parade dagger, and it was actually a part of the parade uniform, the black uniform, very stylish. That was actually designed by Hugo Boss, no less. So no wonder it looked kind of chic. This dagger actually was designed to look good, not to be a good weapon. And the small handle actually emphasizes the length of the blade, and therefore it is made for this very purpose. And it's not made just to be a good fighting weapon, which it isn't. It's not sharp, and the handle is completely uncomfortable. So, to further understand the dagger, we must look at the history of the SS, of the Schutzstaffel. Kind of a hard word when you're speaking English. But anyway. So this means it was the so-called protection squad, and in the beginning, in the early days of Nazi Germany, actually it was pretty much Hitler's personal security detail, protection detail. They were there to simply protect him from any kind of attacks or assassinations. But then, when the Nazis assumed power, actually they started to transform the SS into another branch of the military. So, because Hitler deeply mistrusted the generality of the Wehrmacht, the German army, and rightfully so, because actually he was always afraid that they would try to overthrow the government, which there were a few attempts, none of them successful, but still a few of them came close. Hitler wanted a military branch that was under his direct command, so the Waffen-SS, the Weapon SS, was formed, and that was actually just like any other military branch, except of course they were responsible for the most atrocious mass killings and war crimes that have been recorded in history ever. Well, their honor was loyalty, so they did what they were told. And of course they also supervised the prisoners in the concentration camps, and they directly organized with typical German efficiency, they organized the mass killings and the gas chambers and the burnings of the corpses. A truly sad part in German history. And in the early days, the SS was purely made up from volunteers, and it was actually a big honor if you would be allowed to become an SS man and climb through the ranks. It was only for people that fulfilled the Nazis' idea of like how a Nordic person should look like. Tall, slim, just blue eyes. But then as the war continued, they also drafted a lot of people into the Waffen-SS, even people that had no German passport at all. And later on they just took whoever was available and was able to fight. Since they have done so many crimes, actually the SS is today seen as a criminal organization, so that like the ex-soldiers of the Wehrmacht, of the German regular army, can draw and actually do draw a pension from the German government to this day. The SS members are not entitled to any kind of pension or any money from the German government. They are seen as criminals, not as soldiers. And that brings us to my own family history, as I already announced to you early on. Because, yes, now comes the big news, my grandfather was actually an SS member. Yes, my father's father, Wilhelm Sprave, who was born in 1906, was a member of the notorious Waffen-SS and actually served towards the end of the war. But he was never a Nazi. Actually, he was a coal miner. And coal was seen as something that was absolutely essential for the war. It was the only significant energy source that you could find on German land. And therefore energy was really necessary, and coal was absolutely required to make weapons, to make guns and cannons and everything. So he kept his job as a coal miner almost to the end of the war. But about, in the end of February 1945, just a few weeks before the war ended in April 45, he was actually drafted into the SS. He really didn't have a choice. I mean, they simply put all the paperwork in front of him, and he only had an option to be shot on sight or sign. So that's how he joined the Waffen-SS. He was then brought to one of the training camps, and he was still in training when he was captured as a prisoner of war. He did not even have the tattoo under his arm with his blood group that normally all SS members had, and that probably saved his life. He then spent about 2 years as a prisoner of war, working in a camp just for SS people, just for SS men in England. Since he was a member of the Social Democrats Party, the SPD, before the war, until the day when the Nazis banned that organization, he rejoined them after he returned from England. And he also resumed his job as a coal miner until he fell sick with silicosis and tuberculosis, very common for coal miners back then. I remember him as a very friendly and warm old man. He was very, very kind. He never spoke about the war, and he actually died when I was just 18. So a sad day for sure. Here you can see a picture of him in the POW camp in England with his comrades. You can see they're still wearing the SS uniform, of course minus all the insignia. And here you can see him enjoying a lazy afternoon in his favorite chair. This is exactly the way how I remember him. If you're interested, you can read the whole story with all the details. I wrote a little essay about it. I actually put the link to the document into the text description. It would be a pleasure and an honor for me if you would read it. Alright, now comes the last part of the video, the comparison to its modern cousins. So we've looked at this, but now let's look at the well, I wouldn't say copies, but other versions. So first, of course, we have Todd's version. Okay, and the sheath, of course, here is made from leather and probably, I would say brass, could be copper, and leather thongs. Whereas the SS dagger has a metal sheath. And as you can see, the daggers are actually, from their size, are pretty similar, even though Todd's version, of course, has a nice, long, nice handle that fits my hand like a glove. It's just perfect for me. It's a much better handle than the fancy SS dagger handle. But as you see, the blade length is very comparable. Todd's is a little longer, and also the shape looks similar on the first glance, but then you can see that it's actually kind of flaring out towards the handle, which is very typical for medieval Baselards. And of course it doesn't have all these fancy details which are not really needed for the dagger. Those are design elements that this dagger doesn't have. This dagger also is not sharp. I mean, it's kind of the same bluntness, so you can cut butter, but that's about it, as the original Nazi dagger. But you can actually get this sharpened, and Todd will then sharpen it up for you. It just costs a few British pounds more. It's a beautiful dagger. It is truly based on the 14th century original. It has nothing to do with the Nazi daggers. And I can only say it's a very nice piece of my collection. I'm really grateful that Todd gave me this as a present. Okay, the next one is made by the German company Linder. As you see, it kind of is similar. It also has a metal sheath, but it's very basic, of course. It is a dagger, clearly. And it's also halfway sharp, it's not super sharp. And the design is a little bit like the design of the Nazi original. As you can see, it's kind of the same. But of course the blade is a lot shorter, it's a lot more narrow, the handle is different in design. It's also a little bit larger, so it's a bit small for me, but it's definitely bigger than this one. Steel is 440A, it's stainless, but of course it's not great steel, so I would say this is pretty much a collector's item, letter opener, whatever. It is kind of a look-alike, and I have mixed emotions about this. I mean, who typically would buy this, except a fool like me who buys pretty much any knife that's available. I'm afraid that a lot of people buy it just because it reminds them on the evil Nazi daggers. Yeah, but it's definitely a different design, so it's okay. Now the last one that we are looking at is actually a different issue, because that is the Böker Swiss dagger. And if you actually compare it side by side, you can see that this is just a very similar design. And actually, Böker was one of the main manufacturing companies of the SS dagger back in the 1930s. So they made the original, and then they made this one, and it is different. How is it different? So you can actually take the Böker dagger and put it in the sheath of the original SS dagger. It fits. The design elements are like 100% the same. You would think that they used the original tools and didn't even exchange them after they stopped manufacturing the original Nazi dagger. But there are two main differences, and you can see one immediately, and that is that this has a larger handle. Well, definitely this is nice to hold. It fits my hand. It could be a little larger, but I would say for an average hand, it's a good handle. It gives you purchase. They simply fixed that kind of design flaw. And since Böker, of course, knows how the design is made, but they had no choice, they were ordered to make it just like this. I think they probably always, wanted to make it better than this one. Also, this one is really, really, really sharp. I mean, it's nasty sharp. You can actually shave with the thing. So this is actually a practical knife and dagger. It actually has a steel, it's numbered, so this is number 3995. The blade is made from C75, which is a high carbon steel. Very good for knives actually, although it's not stainless. So they simply took the original design and made a practical dagger from it. It's also a much better knife than the original one, but it also is more expensive. This costs about 274 euros. They also have a version that's like 1200 euros, and that has a black handle, just like the SS version, and even has a blade from Damascus steel. Very high quality dagger, probably. Now, if you keep in mind that the original one was just about, in today's value, about 45 euros, this is many times more expensive, but you also get better value if you buy it. Alright, so they made another version of the SS dagger, but that is not all. Because look what kind of logo you can find on the backside of it. This is the original Böker logo that is long discontinued, but it was used in 1930. It's actually the very same logo that they put on the SS daggers that they made back then. Which I think is kind of questionable. Why would you do this? I mean, who was supposed to buy this? Someone who wants the Nazi times back, and then he gets the next best thing if he cannot get an original one? Probably, I don't know. I have really negative feelings about this. And I actually confronted Böker with this. I asked them, why are you doing this? And they actually confirmed that it was a bad idea, and they said that they have discontinued production. It's actually sold out on their website. So, and since it won't be produced anymore, there's probably a few of them still available at some dealers or so on, but those will be the last. And Böker says that they will now change the design of the dagger to be closer to the medieval originals and away from this, and also they will no longer put the 1930 Böker logo on it. Good move, Böker, good move. This was the story of the evil SS Nazi dagger and its modern day cousins. And some of my personal family history too. I hope you enjoyed it, because it was not easy for me to make this piece. I have one request. Please be sensible in the comments. I will not tolerate any kind of Nazi propaganda, No jokes that talk about Nazis and their victims. Please, no links, no hashtags, no nothing. You can debate about the dagger itself and about history, of course, but please be sensible with this discussion, or else we also risk that YouTube will simply take down the video. So, take care. Never forget these days that shall never come back. Thanks and bye-bye.